In this video, we're going to introduce the statistical test ANOVA, the analysis of variance. And we're going to see how it's related to a t-test and how it's related to multiple linear regression. And you're going to be able to sandwich this ANOVA test in between those two concepts so that you can answer research questions that test the equality of 3 or more population means. If you have a research question where you want to compare multiple groups and see if their means differ, you might realize that the test kind of sounds like a t-test. Is the mean of group 1 equal to the mean of group 2? But there are more than 2 groups. There might be 3 groups. There might be 4 groups. There could be 20 groups. So the ANOVA is a way for you to test, is the mean of group 1 equal to the mean of group 2 equal all the way up to the mean of group G, say if we have G number of groups. Remember, null hypotheses are always about the population parameter, which we use the Greek letter mu. Is the mean in the population equal to a given value? Now, the alternative hypothesis, you're learning a new statistical test, but it's going to be kind of the same as all the tests that we do. Have a null hypothesis, go ahead and collect some data, and then ask yourself, what is the probability of getting that test statistic if the null hypothesis is true? And if that probability or the p-value is small, then you reject the null hypothesis. Now, remember, the null is here, and the alternative is not the null. In other words, somewhere in there is a difference. And this is going to be a little twist. We'll have to add an extra step almost to our t-test. Now, the way we do this is it's analysis of the sample variance. We're going to start with this idea of what is called a one-way or a one-factor ANOVA. And we're going to compare the means of multiple groups. But we're still comparing the mean of one thing, the mean blood pressure, for example, or the mean BMI, or the mean income. Now, you can think of ANOVA, I said you can kind of sandwich it in between the idea of a t-test. So we can say ANOVA is basically a generalization of a t-test, but now we have more than just 2 groups that we're comparing. Or you can think of it that a t-test is just a special case of an ANOVA where you have 2 groups. And a little spoiler alert, we're going to see later that a t-test is also a special type of regression. And that ANOVA as well is also a type of regression. And at the end of this week, we're going to try to put everything we've learned so far under one big umbrella. Now, ANOVA deserves its own little special place because there are really 2 questions when we do an ANOVA. First, we look at that null hypothesis. Is there a difference? And then the question is, if there is a difference, where is it? And we'll see this here. Now, we have to introduce some terminology. And I'll say this, that depending which type of journals you read, what fields you go into, what other classes you might take, you'll see different terms used for the same concepts. It can be a little bit confusing. But we say this idea of a one-factor ANOVA. A one-way ANOVA would be we're looking at a factor, and the factor is the categorical predictor. So you might ask, how does race affect blood pressure? Well, blood pressure is our nice continuous variable, right? That's our continuous response. And if we're trying to use one factor to see what's going on, that would be our single categorical factor. And however you happen to be defining race, maybe you have white, black, Hispanic, white, black, Asian, white, black, however you do it, that is called your factor. And we'll see a bunch of different terms for this. If you just say ANOVA, usually it's a one-way ANOVA. We talked about a mental image of a t-test is just a box plot, really, of 2 groups, and you're looking at the mean of some continuous variable. But what if there are more than 2 groups? Well, now this is sort of our mental image of a one-way ANOVA. Remember those little babies we talked about and their birth weight? We talked about them floating around in space and fitting a model and all this sort of stuff. But what if your research question was simply, does the mean birth weight differ between babies born at A, B, C, and D? How many variables do you have? What types of variables are they? Well, you have a continuous outcome variable, birth weight, and you have a single categorical predictor variable, hospital, you always look at the data. And if we look at the data, we could do a box plot right here. And if we wanted to answer this research question, it's a one-way ANOVA. And it's interesting, if you think about it for a second, what is that term, ANOVA? Well, what are we doing here with ANOVA? And here's what I want you to do. Look at all these little babies over here. If you had to write a 2-word sentence that described this little picture over here, 2-word sentence, subject and verb, what would you write? I think you would write something like, babies vary. There's differences between them. Not every baby is the same. And ANOVA says that variability between the babies, can we explain it by looking at some other factor? And that's why it's called a one-factor analysis of the variance. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at how much do the babies differ within a group. Babies born at hospital A are not all the same. Why? Because babies vary. Babies born at hospital B are not all the same. Because why? Babies vary. That is going to be called the within group variance. We're also going to see that there is a difference between hospital A and hospital B. Why? Well, because babies vary, and they vary by hospital. And that variability we are going to label as between group variability. And this ANOVA test analyzes how much difference is the variability between the groups, this sort of signal between this group and this group and this group and this group and this group, and relative to the variability within the group, the noise. And that's why it's the analysis of the variance. We'll do the mechanics of this in the next set of slides.